Hi, I'm Shami Ghosh. I'm a professor at the Center for Medieval Studies. I teach various things, including Latin and manuscript studies and courses on historical methods and social and economic history. Um, I was trained as a Germanist, though, and I have studied all of the older Germanic languages. And I'm going to talk about that part of what I do and what we do at the Center for Medieval Studies today. I'm going to start by reading out a poem. It's called the Hildebrandslied. It's the oldest surviving bit of verse in a Germanic language. It's a text which is in what we call Old High German, a language in which there are a lot of texts, but normally just one text of different genres and different dialects. And the Hildebrandslied itself seems to have bits and pieces of different dialects in it. It tells the story of Hildebrand, who is a warrior who has been in exile for 30 years and has just returned with an army and finds himself confronted by Hildebrandt, who is his son. Hildebrandt thinks that his father Hildebrand abandoned him as a boy and abandoned his mother defenseless and went into exile 30 years ago. And Hildebrandt also thinks that Hildebrand is dead. Hildebrand does not seem to want to fight his son, and he clearly recognizes that this is his son, but he's not very open in revealing exactly who he is, and Hildebrand is suspicious. They end up preparing themselves to fight, and they fight, and the manuscript breaks off. Ich gehörte dat sägen, dat sich hätten einen Moten Hildebrand enti Hildebrand inter herium twain. Sunu fatarungo iro saro richtun, garutun se iro gudamon, gurtun sich iro svert ana helidos uba ringa, to siet to dero hiltioritun. Hildebrand gemahalta, Heribrand es sunu. Was Heroroman, Ferrahes Frotoro. Fragen gestunt vochem Wortum, where sin Vater veri, Firio in Volcher. Edo welches Knusles du siehst. Ibu du mi enan sages, ich me de odre weit hind in Kunikriecher. Hud ist mir all irmen dort. Hildebrandt gemahalta, Hildebrand is sunu. Dat sageten mir unsere Lüti, alte Antifroter der Erhiner waren, dat Hildebrand heit min Vater, ich heit du Hildebrand. Vorn Herr Oster geweit, loch Herr Otachres nied, hina met Theatricher en die Sinaru Degan filu. Herr Furlet in Lanta Lutila sitten Brut in Bura, barn unwachsan arbelosa. Herr regt Ostarhina. Dessi detriche darbages tuntun fatales mines, dat was so frühantlos man. Herr was Otacher met Tiri, Degano de Kisto met Deotricher, Herr was eo Volkes at enter, imo was eo Fechter die Löb. Hut was Herr honum manum. Nie wanju ich, ihr lieb, aber. Wet du Hermen Gott, wat Hildebrand, obener ab Hevana, dat du neo danna halt mit sus sippan man din knie geleitos. Want Herr du arma untana bauga keisuring getan, so imuse de Kunig gab, unio truchtin. Dat ich dir it nu behuldigibu. Hildebrandt gemalta, Hildebrand es sunu. Mit Gerus kann man geba einfachen Ort wieder Orte. Du bist dir alter Hun, Unmätsbacher. Spenig mit dienen Worten, will ich mich dinus peru werpan. Bist also gealtet Mann, so du eben inwit fortus. Dat sagitun museuli dante vestar uvar ventil seot dat inan week voornaam. Tot is Hildebrand, Heribrand is sunu. Hildebrand kim alta, Heribrand is sunu. Vela gisiu ich in dinem rustim, dat du hebes hema heron blotten, dat du noch die diesem oricha rectioni vurti. Velega nu valtant Gott, quad Hildebrand, we wurts gihit. Ich valuta sumaro enti vintro 60 urlanta, dar man mich eoscerita in volksciotantero, so man mir at burg einigero banuni gefasta, nu skal mich swasat hin suertu hauen, breton mit sino bilju, edo ich imoti banin verdan, doch mach du nu all dich hoch ibo dir din ellentaug, in sus heremo man husti gewinnen, rauber berachnenen, ibo du dar enig recht habes. Der sie doch nu argusto, quad Hildebrand, ostar liuto, der nu viges warna, nu dich es so well lustigt, udea gemeinun. Niuse di motti huerdar sich hutu dero reglo rumen morti, do desero brunono bedero valtan. Do lietun se erist askim skritan skarpem skurem, dat in dem skilten stunt. Do stoppten zusammen steinbord kludun, heuen harmliko huitte skilti, unti im iro lintun lutilo wurtun gewigan mit die wabn. And that's where the fragment stops. Now, at one level, one might say, well, what's so interesting about this? It's just a little bit of verse in which we see what seems to be a father about to fight with his son. But there are many things to unpack, and it has been unpacked from all sorts of different angles. For example, there is a story in classical Persian about Sohrab and Rustam, who are also a father and son pair who also end up fighting. Persian, Farsi, is a Indo-European language. Old High German is an Indo-European language. There have been many people who have done a lot of comparative philology looking at all these older Indo-European languages and finding that there are common elements in their stories and in their mythologies and in how they describe arms and armor and horses and other such things. And people have therefore thought it sometimes legitimate to assume that the ending of Sohrab and Rustam is what we would expect to find in the ending of the Hildebrandslied, if we had its ending. There's a reference to Otachra, who we would know as Odoacer, who was the last person to be deposed in the Western Roman Empire, and when he was deposed in 476, that is conventionally taken as the end of the Roman Empire in the West, or the fall of Rome. There is mention of a Theodoric, who is conventionally supposed to be the Theodoric who was an Ostrogoth, who then ruled over Italy and other parts of what had been the Western Roman Empire for a considerable amount of time. Like Odoacer, Theodoric was also a member of a Germanic-speaking group, that is to say, he spoke a language which belongs to the Germanic language family. But Theodoric had been brought up at the Roman court and spoke Latin, and more than Latin, Greek fluently, and so probably did many of his men. At some point in time, there was a statue of Theodoric that was raised in Ravenna, which was his capital, and Charlemagne, Charles the Great, the Carolingian king, who ruled in the late 8th and the early 9th century, took that statue of Theodoric away from Ravenna with him to Aachen, where he had his court. And that statue of Theodoric then occasioned a rather nasty poem by one of the court poets who didn't like such a figure being there. And even soon after his death, Theodoric was portrayed in both positive and negative terms. What I'm getting at is that while many people think we can access some sort of pure ancient Germanic culture, what we can do is in fact a lot more interesting. What we can access is a period in which cultures began to form out of a symbiosis and a synthesis of things that had been inherited from Rome, partly through the Christian church, and that they had themselves inherited from their own varied cultures of Germanic and Celtic speaking peoples. This is one of the things which is very exciting about doing this kind of work, is that you can learn all of these languages. I have on my desk the edition of the Elder Edda, which is Old Norse poetry, which was written in a manuscript in the 13th century, but some of it apparently dates back to as early as the 9th century, and some of the events that it describes, insofar as they have a historical antecedent, date back to Attila the Hun and his conquests of Europe in the 5th century. So we can do this sort of literary archaeology and excavation through various dead languages and stages of dead languages of what we might think of as a Germanic culture, but we can at the same time understand or seek to understand how these cultures interacted and what happens when you have a big shift. The Center for Medieval Studies in Toronto is possibly the only place, or if not, one of the two only places in North America where it's possible to study every single vernacular of medieval Western Europe. And in all these cases, one of the things that we can examine is how these languages, the vernaculars, interacted with Latin, which was the authoritative language of administration, of religion, of learning. Latin allows us to access most aspects of the Middle Ages in one form or the other, and the bulk of the written material that survives is Latin. But we also have equal expertise and equal provisions for the other languages, the vernaculars. And many of us, like myself, move back and forth between these linguistic and cultural traditions. And that's one of the things which makes the Middle Ages so exciting, is that there's so many different things that one can do with medieval Europe. So I hope that you found this interesting and possibly even a little bit entertaining, and are now going to go and speculate on whether Hildebrand killed Hardubrand or Hardubrand killed Hildebrand, or maybe they just shook hands and went off to have a nice dinner as father and son recently reunited.